You're listening to CIA, Coffee, Intel, and Anxiety, a podcast from retired CIA officers Jeff and Pete. Drawing from decades in the intelligence world, they offer real stories, sharp analysis, and honest reflections on the pressure, decisions, and daily chaos that come with a life of secrets. Add coffee, a dry sense of humor, and a friendship forged under fire, and you've got a podcast like no other.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of CIA, Coffee, Intel, and Anxiety. Hey, Jeff, how are you today? Enough coffee? Are you
Full
still
of anxiety, full of anxiety.
full of anxiety? Well, let's hopefully that you have a little bit of a release here and when we talk about this continuation of the asset recruitment cycle. If you remember from the previous episode, we gave you an overview of the asset recruitment cycle, the initial spotting or identification of a potential asset source. And then it's assessment, development, and then we go on to recruitment, termination. I'm sorry, turnover and termination. So, and then we discussed in detail really how we identify the sources, so many different ways that they can be identified. And then we had to assess whether or not the individual would meet the needs that we believe they would, have the access that we believe that they had, and also that they were accessible to us, that they were able to come out and meet with us on a periodic basis. Typically, we'll look at maybe trying to get together with them at a minimum every 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, but we wanted to maintain that sort of development with them to move the case forward. And that assessment phase moved on to the development phase, right? Getting to know them more and more and more, and then trying to set up what would be a potential recruitment pitch. And that's where we're going to move on to today. We're going to talk about all the different aspects of recruiting, how do we set up that recruitment approach and what are the things we consider and what might be the motivations or vulnerabilities for that individual to accept, might be some of the reasons for that individual to want to decline. And what do we do if the individual declines? So, Jeff, what's some initial comments you have regarding the recruitment?
We talk about the steps in the recruitment cycle, but I think it's important also to understand that one step bleeds into the other one. The developmental phase doesn't end just because you say, hey, would you sign this confidentiality agreement and work for my company? The developmental phase continues, the assessment phase continues the entire relationship. At the end of each meeting, you're going to write up your report, and it is going to include several paragraphs, presumably, on security, how's he acting, is everything still good with the relationship, and continuing assessment of the individual as a producer of intelligence, because it's an ongoing activity. It doesn't ever really go away. Um, the vulnerabilities, lots of people, we use the term vulnerabilities and motivations. Lots of times, the, in my experience, it always comes down to the personal relationship. Yeah, being able to give him some money because I've got a guy back in the US that's working as a contractor and he wants to hire us to provide whatever business intelligence, whatever, whatever. Yeah, color it however you want, but it still is going to come down to a personal relationship. And that's important to understand. And the reason is we are asking him to do something that could potentially lead to his and his family's ultimate demise. So you have to have that kind of personal relationship. The target has to have that kind of personal trust in you. And let's be honest, we are lying and misleading him the entire time. Not everybody can do that. Some people have moral quandaries with that, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It won't help, it won't serve you as a case officer or as an operations officer, and that's okay too. So when we're moving down the road, we've gone through the developmental phase, We've got to the recruitment phase. That means I know what this guy needs. This is not the first time I've given this guy money. I've given him money before for reports. Now, for me, one of my favorite tricks was, when you do the formal recruitment, it's like you've been working with him already. You've already been giving him money. He's already given you sensitive information. He or she has already given you sensitive information. So now it's time to sort of formalize the relationship. To us and to the folks back home, this is an important step because it means we can ask him harder questions. And that's what it's all about. But for me, one of my favorite tricks was I would have a confidentiality agreement. It was about a paragraph long. Didn't mean anything to anybody, but it was a confidentiality agreement which implants in their brain this is a confidential relationship. And what I always did was I always stapled the cash, usually $100 bills, to that agreement and said, okay, I got this agreement here. If you're ready to sign it, here you go. So there was no doubt or question what is involved in this relationship. Clearly, money for information. Now, that's not what it says, but that's clearly the message that was delivered. And I never had one person not be willing to, pull that $400 or $500 off the back of that agreement and sign it.
Isn't that defacing U.S. currency?
No, you can staple it. It's okay. It's okay.
Well, I think it's important to point out that the CIA's mechanism, or what they play upon to be able to offer the source something in return for their assistance. It's very transparent, and it should be a win-win. Regarding they're going to give us something that's going to benefit us, and we're going to give them something that they strive for. Many times it's going to be money or what money can buy. They might be using that money to set aside for eventually when they retire and be able to travel or be able to put their kids through college, a good university, or maybe it's for money that they need for a very costly medical treatment. But it's not only money. Many times there's sometimes we get individuals that will, work for us purely on ideology, especially during the Soviet era, right? Or maybe even with Russia today, individuals who don't believe in the system of government that they're living under, and they believe that, anything that the United States might be able to help make some changes and better the relationship and maybe force some changes in their own country. So that ideology sometimes can be a big factor. There's other ones, revenge. We need to talk about revenge. There are people that would love to get back at the companies that they work for, or the organization or the government office that they work for, because they despise their supervisor. So they might be, love to take that money as an added bonus, but really one of the strong motivations is, I want to give it to these guys. I hate them, I want to make them pay. And they kind of enjoy that satisfaction of doing it. Or there's other things that we can play upon is ego. Many times I've run across a number of people, right? All you have to say is, if you know that they have a strong ego, I bet that can't be done. Nobody would be able to get that information. You wouldn't be able to do that, would you? And if they come back, of course I can. And all you got to do is egg them on, prove it to me, right? And that is like the motivation. That's even more important than any money, is just being able to show that they are smarter than anybody else and that they can do it. So I think the way that we as an agency typically are trying to do something where the individual believes that they're giving something to us that's going to benefit us, and they're receiving something in return that's going to benefit them, compared to other services like the Russians, like the North Koreans, like perhaps the Chinese, and there's a few others there, which is not necessarily a win-win relationship. You might coerce an individual to provide that information. If you don't provide us with this information, something's really bad is going to happen to one of your family members, right? Or they could set up a trap. They could set up a number of different traps that one is called in particular the honey trap, where it's basically they will send an individual of the opposite sex, typically, to target you. And it appears to be just like a relationship that just like buds from, hey, having meeting somebody, and all of a sudden you find this person attractive. They develop this sort of romance and event, and they're maybe picking up some information from a bedside manner, but the ultimate goal is to, at some point, get that individual, through that individual, to force you to provide information back to them. It might be that, oh, the person that's been like targeted against you, now they're into some big problems, and there's going to be something really bad happening to them unless they can get somebody to provide this information, and can you help me out, right? So there's a lot of these different tricks that are, but we always felt, I think I've never known a case personally where we've used coercion per se, like these other services do, because usually,
Unreliable.
no, it's not reliable, and they might fabricate, or, turn on you, right? We want people that are gonna be loyal to us and not just working for us because they believe that we, hold the power over them for the time being.
Didn't the Chinese do that with a congressman out in California, where they had the lady who was his driver theoretically, or something like that? Very nice Chinese lady, and he was a congressman that he got in trouble over. I don't think he lasted once that news came out.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's quite common. The other big one, you touched on it, is the revenge. People really don't like it when they get passed over for promotion. And many countries in the world, some in the US, of course, but most countries is worse. You get promoted based on your connections or your family name or things like that, as opposed to your competency. And I've had a very good relationship with someone who was very frustrated that he didn't get promoted. And by the time I finished that relationship, he had the best technical library in the country because I always took him technical books every time we met.
It reminds me of a case that I can't say where it happened, but it was in a country where there was a big target of interest to us. And it so happened that the individual that we recruited, who was the had inside access, he was from another country, you know, and he despised not only sort of the organization he was working for, but he looked down upon all the locals that were working for this company. I mean, kind of like this, more of a superior attitude, I think. And so he did this for money, but it was also sort of a means to get back at this organization. And what he provided was, it's so funny. I'll go into detail about the handling when we talk about the handling, but he brought to our meetings a thick manila envelope full of documents. He would pick these documents, off people's desks or in the trash. Maybe people would be like preparing a presentation and they made one little error, in one of the titles, and so they would discard it into the trash and print out, a new one. And so he would pick up these documents, literally be easily 15, 20 documents that he would give to me every time.
Who was the
And
guy in the U.S. military that was doing that?
oh yeah,
I can't think of that guy's name. Probably what, 10, 15 years ago?
or
Uh,
even less. Yeah, maybe
yeah,
yeah.
but lots of documents that he collected and gave to his dad. And as I recall, it was the mother, the guy's wife, that got angry at him that turned him over to the FBI because he wouldn't give him the money. She wouldn't give her the money that he was getting
Yeah.
paid. Go figure.
Most of my recruitments were sort of based upon you developing this relationship with somebody, and all of a sudden start talking about, hey, I'm working on this project, all right? And you would be a great member of my, I'm getting this project together. It's going to be, I think it's going to be very, very lucrative and beneficial for, other reasons. And I'm looking for people that can assist me because I don't have access to all of these. I can address a certain part of this, but I'm looking for people that can help me. I'm trying to form a team, and you would be a perfect person that could really help me, help me do this. And in addition to that, you could be, sharing the profits, and I know you wanted to have some money for sending your kids to school, and this might be a great opportunity to do this. So that always worked. And to be honest with you, out of all the pitches I have always made, there was not one single one that was refused. The only exceptions to that, it wasn't that the pitch was refused. It was that in two of these cases, the individual said like this, no, no, no. And I think, oh my gosh, the guys, what's going on now? And because I saw the no coming, what's going to be the objection? And the objection was, you are my friend. We're great friends. We've been getting together so long doing this, and I give you information, whatever you ask for me. I don't want anything in return. I don't want anything. So let it go. If he's willing to do that for a while, and I'll come back later and get him, to accept me. We want them to accept something. And usually, it's money because it's something that they become dependent upon and kind of works psychologically. It works in our favor, right? But if they're willing to provide us with information and not initially want anything in return, why not? We'll go for that for sure.
They still get some nice gifts.
What about we should probably address what happens though. I mean, when we get ready to make that pitch, we feel like almost certain. I would say a good 90% sure that they're going to accept the pitch, but there's always that what if they don't? And what can be some of the consequences if they don't accept the pitch? What can be some of the consequences, Jeff? What do we need to be concerned about?
The best way to avoid that is to make sure that you've done the developmental phase. And this is where guys like you and I, we want to move forward at a set speed, but we also have to keep in mind that we need to make sure that everything's developed properly, that the personal relationship has developed properly. You said you've done some already. I know you talk a little bit about giving specific assignments. You should do that before the pitch.
Oh yeah. It builds
And
up.
yeah, that's right. It builds up. The same thing as we talked about, accepting compensation, signing receipts. These are all things, it's all part of the developmental process. That's why you never quit developing, you never quit assessing. And then you get them into, the relationship management phase that you talk about. So once you do all that, you have to lay the groundwork. I mean, we watch too many movies where, it happens in between commercials in 10 minutes. Now, that's not how it happens. Sometimes it happens over 4, 5, 6, 10, 12 months, depending on the nature of the relationship and how often you're meeting them. So that's the important part, is that you want them to get comfortable with you doing things which are going to lend support to the clandestine relationship, or to the covert. They're never really clandestine, not for the work you and I did, but they were covert or very discreet relationships. I had dinner at an asset's house every time I went to the country. His wife knew who I was. His kids knew who I was. I took them gifts. I mean, it's Uncle Jeff. Well, okay, it wasn't quite Uncle Jeff, but it's pretty close. So wasn't exactly confidential. Um, but nobody else knew about it from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. I think we pretty much when we put a lot of emphasis on that personal relationship, so that if that guy, I mean, if it were to happen that he or she would say no, I can't do it. There could be a number of objections, right? I don't want to. I feel it's too dangerous, and that's when we would address it. Well, we're going to change our meeting relationships. We're going to make it much, safer, right? But we try to address some of the potential objectives. But if we address these different objectives, and at the end of the day, the individual says, "No, I'm not going to do this." We're pretty much still feel confident that he or she is not going to go back and report us to their government, right? Because they still trust the relationship that we've had with them, and they're not going to want to betray the relationship or put us into any certain danger or problem. So that's why that trust and that relationship we build is so important.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And it's all transition. Nothing is ever, there's no line in the sand. Because then you talked about some of the meeting locations. You don't meet a guy in a big public restaurant, 3 consecutive months, and then all of a sudden, you move him to this little quiet bar around the corner. You want to transition there so that there are no big changes that would get somebody's attention, his or anybody else's. Everything is a transition. You're moving this relationship from a very public relationship because you met him at a public affair, a public event, where, having a party or whatever, dinner, but it's a transition to a much quieter relationship. For me, it was dinner at his house every time I went in country, and that was okay. It wasn't perfect, but it worked for the operation. It's not going to do that in every country, but most of the ones that I had, actually, that's how it worked, is that we had dinner. and then the asset and I would go downstairs in basement or whatever, drink some scotch and have a detailed discussion.
Mhm. I think there's a few, before we finish here, there's a few nuances we need to address because understanding the different types of recruitments. First of all, it could be an official recruitment, meaning, the individual believes we're working for the US government, right? And we're pitching them to work on behalf of the US government. That's one type of recruitment. Another type of recruitment might be a commercial recruitment where the individual believes that we're working for some commercial entity. And we're pitching that, we're making the pitch for this individual to assist us or to provide information that they believe is going to a commercial entity, right? Most likely the United States, the US company. The third one is called a false flag. That is when we impersonate not being a US person, but being maybe somebody from another country. It could be a lot of different uh, countries that we could, let's say that we know that this individual or people in this country tend to hate Americans. Well, it doesn't matter if they're working for the government or for business, that they just hate Americans. But we know that they love French, so perhaps we impersonate being somebody from France. Let's say in France, it could be, it can be a lot of different examples. We impersonate being somebody from France, and we make that pitch. Whether it's the French government or it's impersonating being a French businessman. At the end of the day, if they accept that recruitment pitch, they believe they are providing information to the French government or to a French commercial entity. So those are different things that we have in our toolkit, depending upon what we believe the individual will best accept as far as where this recruitment pitch is eventually going to be
And lots of
coming
times
from.
we do this thing called a daisy chain, where initially the recruitment is to help a friend of mine or help my company or help a friend of mine's company back in the US. Okay, so you're developing a discrete relationship. And then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, I have to leave, whatever, and somebody else gets introduced who works for that company, but also has a relationship with some of the U.S. government entities. And so you're introducing the government, the government, U.S. government picture. And so that's then the next relationship that might go on for 6 months where they're comfortable. They can tell they're working for the U.S. government just by the nature of the questions. And then the third step of that daisy chain is to turn it over to making an official agency because that allows the relationship to go deep underground. Where you can
That's
say,
probably I don't know what percentage of those recruitments get to that stage though. It's kind of a minority, right? But
oh, I would guess it's a small one, yeah.
it
Certainly
does
the ones
happen.
you and I were involved with, very few of them got there. But I'm sure they also had other ones. Um, uh, well, some of the guys I handled early on were very, very discreet, very, very deep, deep cover relationships.
Mhm. Probably another thing we should talk about, because most likely individuals won't hear about it otherwise, is the cold pitch. Okay, the cold pitch is something that is utilized for a number of different reasons. But think about it: we have not developed a relationship with this person. We're just going to walk up to this person who is the target, and we're going to pitch them on behalf of the U.S. government. Right there. Most likely they're not going to accept, but there's always a small chance. But these are individuals that are very, very difficult to get to. And comes to my mind sometimes are people from North Korea who might travel out. It could even be, some people from the previous Soviet Union that would travel out, or maybe even some Chinese officials. Individuals we can't get to and maintain a relationship with, but we're going to make that cold pitch and see what happens. It might be maybe we intend to see, maybe there's a slim chance this person might accept, or maybe we just want to create some angst within that individual's organization that when he comes back and he reports this pitch, they're going to have all kinds of issues. They're not going to trust this individual. They're going to launch an investigation. It's going to mess them up from a counterintelligence standpoint. So just keep that in mind. There is something called cold pitch that is just that one-time approach, and for a number of different reasons why we might try to do something like that.
I would love to know the success rate on cold pitches.
From the
I,
standpoint of recruiting somebody, I think very, very low.
yeah, well, collecting intel. So yeah, I would guess it's also pretty low, and I think it's probably used as much as a destructive tool as it is an intelligence collection tool. You want this guy out of here, so we're going to make him report that the U.S. government approached him for intel, and that will cause his host country to wonder what he's doing.
Mhm.
So anyway, what else we got, Pete?
Well, I think it's also important to highlight that not every single source we bring on board is somebody that we've gone out and have done the spotting, assessing, developing, and recruiting cycle. There are individuals who will volunteer to work for the CIA. And we had a bunch of them. I mean, most of the significant information, some of the information of the highest quality, of highest interest to the president has come from people who have volunteered. A lot of this, even especially during the Soviet era, where you have individuals who would try to establish contact with whom they believe would be an American diplomat, and they maybe would approach the individual in their, knock on the window of their automobile or slip a note under the door. And just imagine they're risking their life and they're just cold, coming up cold and trying to get in contact with somebody. And but at the end of the day, these have been really, really, really strong and productive cases. And once again, it's a minority of the cases that are volunteers, but they're a significant percentage of the value of intel that's been produced.
Yeah, they're called volunteers or walk-ins because they literally walk into the embassy or to the office or whatever and say, "Hi, I want to give you some information." So it's a part of it's a part of our business that we don't talk about much, but it's a very important part of our business as well.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's a whole, whole other thing about how we handle those situations, but we probably can't get into that level of detail. Um,
So next time, what were we talking about? Talking about how do we meet people? How does it look? It's how do we handle them once we've taken them through the assessment, development, and recruitment process? Then we have to handle them, which is how we meet with them on a regular basis. How do we keep that secure? How do we make everybody happy and make sure that everything is in line? How do we protect the covers that are involved? How do we protect the asset? And one thing that Pete and I are very, very aware of is that when it comes down to it, the asset is much more important than he or I ever were. And that's the way the agency treats them. I mean, we're expendable. The asset is not. So we'll talk much more about the handling, and we'll have lots of examples on how do you handle these people? How do you handle them securely and safely and happily so that the operation can continue? Pete, any final words beyond that?
Yeah, well, just looking forward to receiving some of your comments regarding these episodes and questions, and please come back. And if you've kind of joined us late, you might want to go back and listen to a few of the earlier episodes, especially when we start talking. We're talking at an asset recruitment cycle. We're doing this over 3 or 4 meetings, so you want to actually get it from the get go. Till next time, my friend Jeff, you take care.